of the Equality Lounge at Cleveland Power of Sports Summit. Hello to everyone joining us on site and to those of you joining us on our live stream. We had a great first session to kick us off for the day, and we have our first virtual session coming up right now. It is Future Fans: How Gen Z Will Shape Sports, and we'll be discussing how to foster the next generation of sports fans in a way that complements their digital-first, purpose-driven lives. Hello, Anna.
Hi.
How's it going?
Great to see you.
Good to see you. I see that we're getting all our panelists on here, so I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. My name is Anna Blue with the Female Quotient. Very, very excited to have this conversation today. I know that the futures of everything is very top of mind for so many people. The future of work, the future of consumerism, of activism, of all of these things. And this future of sports, particularly from the fan perspective, is definitely one of those things, as this is a generation that consumes content, media, entertainment completely differently than anybody before them. So we have a great panel lined up today, a great conversation, and we will jump in. I think we might be waiting for one more person, but I will start getting some of the introductions in. All right, so today we are joined by, and I want to make sure I get this right, is it Anmol Malhotra?
Yes.
Wonderful. We have Alana, who is the head of sports partnerships for Snap, one of our amazing partners. Alana Meraz, founder and CEO of Latinx and Sports. Carlyle Rickenmann, who's on our FQ Next Gen Board of Advisors and is a graduating student at UNC. And Lyndsay Signor, SVP of Consumer Engagement, NBC Sports and the Olympics. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this conversation today. So many different perspectives that I'm excited to sort of hear from this intergenerational and mixed perspective panel. So thank you for being here. Really quickly, I just gave a quick introduction, but would love to hear a little bit more about each of you, what you do, who you are, and why you are as jazzed as I am to have this conversation today. So I'm going to go in reverse order. Hi, Lyndsay. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. Lyndsay Signor, I oversee the consumer engagement team for NBC Sports and Olympics. So I have the pleasure of leading a team that gets to build really awesome marketing plans for all of our big events, our sports products. The social media team and data and CRM teams roll into me as well. So our job is really to take whatever our priority is and try to get as many people as possible to those priorities. And we get to work on really awesome stuff like the Olympics and Sunday Night Football. And we have a gaming and betting part of our org. And we work really close with Anmol at Snap. So we have the pleasure of just doing a lot of really cool stuff. What's interesting about this panel and important is, especially as a marketer, how we are engaging all different audiences is critical. And Gen Z, I feel like we were, an hour ago talking about how do we get millennials in. But now it's Gen Z and they are a unique bunch. So I think it's important for us as marketers to figure out how to engage them every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, it's like an ever evolving thing. I think somebody said the other day, if we had known this generation would likely never own a television. And that just like blew my mind, right? Just to think about how different it is. So that's awesome. Hi, Carlyle. Welcome.
Hi, Anna. It's good to see you on Zoom again. So as Anna mentioned, and as you can see in my background, I'm graduating in May from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm double majoring in political science and advertising and PR. And as Anna can attest, I jumped on the chance to talk on this panel because one, I'm really passionate about Gen Z and sports. This year, I took a sports communication class and our whole project was pitching to the Miami Heat how to further engage with their Gen Z demographic. So everything from different activations to new social media content. And so I was very excited to be a part of this and kind of talk about that experience.
That's awesome. Well, we're definitely going to be picking your brain. So thank you. And congratulations on graduating. Alana, welcome. Happy to have you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this. So I'm the founder and CEO of Latinx and Sports. I started it in October of 2020, really when I saw that there wasn't an organization kind of having that conversation and, talking about diversity and like how we can further Latinx representation in the front office and, tell those stories and show that that's something that, teams and leagues care about. And I'm really excited to be a part of the panel. On Monday, super soon, I start my job with the U.S. Soccer Federation as fan experience coordinator. So this is definitely something that I will be speaking about a lot, and we'll use it in my day-to-day, like we were saying, like how to start engaging Gen Z, because they're the future, fan base of the sports industry. So super excited to be here.
Awesome. That's great. And congratulations on your new role as well. I love your generation. Like you all have like your own company and you work for somebody else. I love it. It always makes me so excited. Like the side hustle is real. It makes me feel like I do not do enough. Anmol, hi, welcome.
Hey guys, thanks again for having me. So I oversee sports partnerships at Snapchat, been here for about 6 years. We focus on Gen Z a ton, so this panel is perfect for our audience and our generation. I think when we started doing sports content back in 2015, we were quickly reminded exactly what you said, Anna. This generation consumes sports differently, use their phone primarily. And we've been trying to kind of capture that audience and really drive the next generation of fans. As Lyndsay mentioned, we're close partners with NBC, so we'll talk a lot about our fun relationship around the Olympics too.
Awesome, I love it. And I love when our partners are also partners. Like it's so cool. We're one big happy family. All right, so you all have touched on it a little bit. So let's actually just break down kind of right from the gate, what makes Gen Z so different in terms of how they consume sports and entertainment, but certainly as sports fans, what makes this generation so different? What is it that you guys are looking out for? Alana, let's start with you. She might be frozen. Okay, we'll come back to you. All right, Lyndsay.
Sure, yeah. So as a marketer, and I will speak kind of as a marketer for this whole panel, but I think the biggest thing about Gen Z is that they know life only with digital, and a lot of them, like you mentioned, don't have a TV. Some of them are completely operating in a way, especially the younger part of Gen Z, it's kind of however their parents might be consuming content, but also a lot of their parents, like myself, are millennials. So it's just sort of this hodgepodge. But I think these generations are so vast. But I think the one thing that makes them so different is that at every age, they know how to navigate devices. Many of them have never seen like a television guide. So the idea of like channel surfing to find what you want to watch is just not really inherent to this generation. But also it's really about the content and getting it to them where they are. And that I think is the biggest differentiator, even though they're kind of ages like 6 to 24, which is so incredible. It's really about just having more options than any generation has ever had. And how do we kind of make sure our content breaks through?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love these panels. I mean, Next Gen has always been my work. And I love when people say things like they've never seen a channel guide, and like how awesome that is, and old I feel at the same time. So it's a great combination. All right, Alana, I think you're back with us now. So yeah, just talking about what makes this generation different in terms of how they're consuming sports content.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I'm the oldest of my cousins, and I see them on TikTok. Like they were viral on TikTok before I even downloaded the app. So I definitely think, they consume it in such a different way. Like I remember seeing them, like they had iPads before I even had an iPhone, like it's definitely like what we were saying, like it's a digital first generation. I think that's something that even now, also like during COVID and the pandemic, like we all had to shift to just everything was digital first, right? Like it was all about what content can we show on our social media channels, on, ESPN and all things like that. So I think that they're definitely consuming it in a way that I wasn't, right? Like I was always watching on TV with my family, or I was going to games. And now it's like, how can I put all these different games on, on my different TV screens or my laptop and figure out how to watch all of them. So they're definitely consuming in a completely different way.
Yeah, it's like the multimedia approach. So for Anmol, you and Carlyle both, not only how Gen Z is consuming, but like how are they engaging as fans differently than what we've seen before? Anmol, how about you?
Yeah, so I'll piggyback on some of those points. I think there's like three things that we see. connectivity, optionality, and shareability. So the first one is connected everywhere, right? So I remember days where I used to catch my highlights on SportsCenter when I got home at 6 p.m. Now you can open up your phone or your laptop and get it anywhere across any of our platforms. So I think the first thing is that you're just connected more than any generation has before us. The second one that Lyndsay kind of mentioned is optionality. They have unlimited options. So the remote control for them is their phone, and their channels are their apps. People always ask us, who are we competing with? I think it's just time, right? So any app on a phone is a competitor to, I think, all of us with the Gen Z population, because they can just hop in and out whenever they want. And then lastly, shareability. I think this is really important for us. We think this generation wants to like share their experiences more than anybody else with their close friends and family. So being able to take a snap, send a tweet, take a TikTok at a stadium, around an event, and show off that you're there, or highlight what you're doing, we think is kind of like that fundamental premise of Gen Z and social, right? So I think that piece is really important to us. And to the second part of your question, like, how do we see them engage? It needs to be fun, interactive, and also for us, like super short form, right? Attention spans are also very, very small. So you have to keep them excited and engaged. Otherwise, again, back to point two, optionality, they can just jump somewhere else. So I think it's a really fun, but also challenge for all of us to keep this generation engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second you feel like you have a handle on it, it changes, because it's also
100%.
I love that you mentioned attention span. 8 seconds is actually the attention span of Gen Z. So when you think about it from the marketing perspective, I love your smile for that, Carlyle. You probably experienced that. But from a marketing perspective, it's like, how do you really drive something home in 8 seconds? I mean, that feels impossible in so many ways, and yet it's happening all the time. All right, Carlyle, you've heard from everybody. What do you want to add in terms of the consumerism piece, the fan engagement for your generation?
Definitely. And it's so funny that this is my generation just kind of like in the spotlight right now. But I think back to what Anmol said about experience, I've seen that so much, even for myself and my friends, currently when you can't go to games, but the experience of being in a stadium and like really heightening that fan experience is something Gen Z wants. We want each game to feel like the next big thing, like the Coachella of sports. We want that festivalization more than anything. And so I think that's a big way in how we're interacting nowadays with in-person events, as well as finding a way to bring that to the digital space. I think another thing I've noticed with Gen Z is they do love this like nice, easy, snackable content. And then they also want something that's emotionally moving. They want to see how a sports team can connect you to a specific player. Like, we don't just want to see stats and highlights on SportsCenter. We want to hear how this specific player has overcome adversity, how they're making an impact in their community, what they're doing to make change. And so I think that's a big thing too. I think about just that inside behind the scenes look is something we really value, because we actually get to see what this person is like. I think about the absolute exponential growth and watching Netflix's The Last Dance and ESPN's Last Dance last summer. Everyone thought Michael Jordan was this perfect, awesome guy, but he had a temper. He was competitive, and the famous line, like, and I took that personally, and everyone loved that. And that's long form, but we really got to see this inside peek of a character we didn't grow up around. And I think that's something we all really value as well.
Awesome. Yes. And see, also when I hear somebody say we didn't grow up around Michael Jordan, I feel old. Yeah, but that's great. And you actually touched on a few things that we're going to continue to talk about, like the social impact piece, which I know is a huge, the activism part is a huge piece for your generation as well. So we've heard things, I think, because of the different options, because of everything that you all just spoke about, and how this generation is so rapidly changing. There's this idea out there that Gen Z is actually engaging less as sports fans. Is that because it just looks different, that they are still engaging. It is still high engagement. It just isn't what we're used to judging engagement by. Or are you actually feeling that decline? And Carlyle, you're at a very sports driven school. So I don't know. I feel like on UNC's campus, sports will never be something that drifts back, but maybe you're seeing something with the larger generation, across the board. But Alana, I know that you're really interested, which is amazing, in the inclusivity piece and, really bringing diverse voices to the table. Are you seeing that your generation, especially with all that we've talked about over the last year plus about inclusivity and diversity, do you feel like your generation actually is still in it with sports, or are you seeing that change?
I definitely think I'm seeing the change. I love sports. I'll go to any game, watch it, all the time on TV, but I definitely have, friends and colleagues that they're not that into it. And I think it speaks very true to what Anmol was saying. Like, it's about that attention span. Like, they don't want to sit at a baseball game, for 3 hours and watch it happen. Like, everyone talks about how it's a dying sport, and I'll always say it's not, but it's kind of happening at the same time. Like, I see it in real time with the people that I'm around all the time. So I think it's definitely having those options and how they want to consume it. Definitely, like what Carlyle was saying, athlete driven content and that inside look, like, people love that. And maybe that's how they're engaging with it. They want to hear the story. They want to hear what they overcame, how they grew up, what twists and turns they had in their journey. And maybe they're not that interested in what's going on the field. So I think it really just depends on like what they want to see from the team, or maybe from that athlete, and just the different ways that they decide to consume it. And it might not be what it was for us watching, soccer on Saturday mornings. It's now, how did that player, like, what's their story? I want to see a documentary on them. And that's how they rather engage with that kind of fan base.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's, I hadn't actually thought about it, right? But I engage that way, right? I'll probably not watch the entire game, but if my husband is watching it and I hear something interesting about a player, I'm looking them up online, I'm looking at their Instagram, I'm reading about their story. From a marketing perspective, Lyndsay, is that what you're seeing? So how are you seeing this generation different? Are we losing them?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because such a huge measurement in sports television is television ratings, right? So that captures one segment of people, and we know, you started this panel with, a lot of Gen Z will never have a television, but we also know is that sports, live sports especially, is all about storytelling. I mean, it is the backbone of the Olympics, right? Every 4 years, these are new stories. It's like the greatest reality show ever. But we can't wait 4 years to start to talk to really any generation about these athletes. We have been blessed with many Olympics with Michael Phelps and Usain Bolt. Simone Biles is as an amazing competitor, but you do have all these other amazing stories. So I think from a marketing perspective, it's important to sort of understand what works with this generation, but there's a lot to offer on the sports side. It's just getting them captivated. And I think part of it too is, we can't just use one level of measurement. When we talk about like engagement, that could be watching a video. We know that folks will watch a full episode of a documentary. That's great. That's a lot longer than 8 seconds, but I think it's how we're sort of looking at what it means to be engaged. And it also is this entire life cycle, right? We all may, like, if you're on campus at UNC, you can't get away from sports. If you have a parent like me who works in sports, I mean, my kids are 2 and 5. They know what golf is. I don't know that they're watching it, but it's on our television. My daughter just started T-ball. So there's also some of those things that you're doing sort of with your family or through just your day-to-day that I think our goal is to try to keep you engaged, kind of be a part of that life cycle. Ideally, you're watching it also, but it might be that we just have to relook at what engagement and measurement means. Because everyone here has said, like, yeah, I actually do engage in sports, but maybe it's just we have to look at it in a different way and kind of what success is, because we can't kind of stick, television ratings as like the end all be all when we know that there are so many more options than that. So I think that's what we're thinking about now, is sort of like, what is success and how do we help Gen Z have their first Olympic memory, and then they're in and they're with us for life. And that's not just the Olympics, that's everything. But I think that's sort of how we're looking at it right now from a marketing side.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Being traditional sort of television, how are you finding them where they are, and what does that mean for definitions of success? That's really great. So, Anmol, for you, it's not television, like it is actually the short form engagement. Are you seeing? I mean, we've heard literally Gen Z called the Snap generation, like that's out there, right? So, are you actually seeing an increase, or even with the short form content, are you experiencing less sports engagement?
Yeah, I think, what you said in the beginning is exactly how I would describe it. It's different, right? So instead of I enjoy sitting on my couch and watching a 3 to 4 hour sporting event, people who are 15 or 16 may not, and that's okay. I think the way that they're consuming this type of content has just evolved and changed. And to the point Alana made earlier about like the MLB, it's a great observation. And I think it's up to leagues, it's up to broadcasters and others to like evolve with this generation as well. I know last year or 2 years ago now, the MLB in many stadiums removed thousands of seats for like social gathering spaces for Gen Z, right? Which is super smart because I love going to baseball games and I'll watch them from start to finish. But if you're a young person, you want some sort of element of having fun with your friends. So I think it's up to these organizations to kind of understand what's happening. The second piece too, I think what we see in our platform a ton is personalization. Again, I grew up right outside New York City. I'm a huge Yankees, Knicks, Rangers, Giants fan. I will always root for my teams no matter who's on them, for better or for worse. And I think the young generation follows individuals a lot more, right? So they care less about this team pride or this team following, but they care about where, Kyrie's going to be playing or LeBron in the NBA or what Serena's doing, right? And I think that's a big shift for people to realize too, because you don't have that like diehard fandom around necessarily a team, but you do around the player. So we've kind of adjusted our coverage as well. And Lyndsay alluded to this, but the NBC back in 2018, we did a show with those guys around following athletes, individuals. And I think we both realized that on top of what we were doing to cover the games, there's a lot of interest from people on Snap around who are these people, off the court, off the fields, off the ice, right? And I think our focus is finding those storylines. And we like it as well because, I think a lot of folks fall into the trap of catering to their hardcore fans. We look after the casual fans, right? The people who don't know who LeBron is or who Serena is or who Megan Rapinoe is. How do you pique their curiosity? And that's around the pregame, the postgame, the fans, the fashion lines, the family, all these things off the court. And that's really been our focus on Snap, to find the storylines not told across major media.
That's so awesome. I can't even imagine a world where people don't know who those people you just mentioned are, but they exist, and you always want to find new sports fan. And I love what you also said about the individuality piece. I certainly noticed that with my son. He's also a college student, and I've seen, he follows LeBron. He follows the specific players. There's not like a basketball team that he loves. It's sort of this hodgepodge mix of who's playing. Which is really interesting to see that spread across sport. I feel like that's been in there with the basketball for a little bit longer than probably starting with the Michael Jordan era, but than other sports. But now it's kind of moving to across the board. Carlyle, what about you? You are on, again, very sports heavy campus, so you might not see less engagement at UNC, but are you? Like, am I wrong? Do you actually see a different kind of perspective in terms of how young people are engaging with sports?
Well, first off, Anmol and Alana, if you'll ever want to go to a baseball game, let me know. I love going. I'm probably one of the very few people in my generation and my friend group that enjoys sitting there and watching a 3-4 hour game. But I definitely am seeing more of that personalization as well that y'all mentioned. You see it in both people that Gen Z follows and also the sports they follow. We've seen a big rise in surfing, extreme sports that people are engaging with because it's these individuals and it's also this high speed, action packed adrenaline rush content. I'd say on UNC's campus, sports engagement has been about the same, if not growing, just with it's kind of right now, it's distance makes the heart grow fonder. It's harder to go to football games. So you're like, if you get the rare chance to get a ticket, you're going to go. And it's kind of I noticed that our generation is really strong in brand loyalty. We're one of the most brand loyal generations that's really ever been recorded. So when you come here, I did not grow up a UNC fan at all. I grew up a South Carolina fan, which to people here is like a big shock. And they're like, what are you doing? But I got here, and as a freshman, like, they rope you in. They want you to be involved. They want you to go to games. They figure out fun ways to engage with students, whether, I mean, every college student likes free t-shirts, free food, just different promotional items to get you wrapped in early. And then you become like a lifelong fan. And so I think that's a big thing. It's that Lyndsay kind of mentioned, like engaging and capturing people early. We're a generation that if you can do that successfully, we're going to stay with that group, that team, or that player for decades and decades to come.
That's great. That's such good advice. So what are some of the trends that you guys are seeing sort of as you're talking about, especially for you, Lyndsay and Anmol, and sort of making these decisions about how to adjust and adapt? From a media perspective, what are some of the trends that you guys are seeing, or some of those decisions that are being made that you feel comfortable sharing about how to chuck and jive and move around this generation to increase engagement, to think about loyalty from here on out? Anmol?
Yeah, definitely. So, high energy, visual, fun for us, right? We have to keep people engaged. And this goes back to the attention span piece. And I think you said the 8 seconds. We have this slide in some of our decks. That's less than a goldfish, which is insane to think about, right? So we have to really keep this generation moving and exciting and energetic. So a lot of times we tell our partners, Lyndsay will know this well, right? It's really easy to create one cool story with like one snap. That's the tile that drives people in. It's much harder to keep them, to let them stay, right, and complete a whole edition. So we look at stuff like time spent and completion. That's a huge metric for us on the content side. How do we get young people to stay? And the second piece is them to come back. How do they come back and watch our Olympics content every day of the week? So those two things are much harder to do, and that takes authentic storytelling. It takes, really understanding your audience. A lot of times we tell our partners, right, you can't just like cut down what you're doing everywhere else and put it on Snap and just assume it's going to work. This is a different type of cohort, different type of audience that moves quickly, is much more fickle. And as we said earlier, they have unlimited options. They can move to anything else whenever they want to. So those are really kind of the key things that we focus on in trying to kind of drive engagement. Another piece I wanted to mention is that, we started sort of a content business, but over the past couple of years, we really enhanced our camera tools. So if you guys familiar with Snap, like lenses, filters, augmented reality, finding those really fun camera marketing tools that users can share with their friends is super important for us at Snapchat. It makes it, again, fun, and you can take someone's brand and put it on your face and reinvent it and then share it with somebody else. So adding those elements on the tech side really helps amplify all of this in our world of sports. And again, keeps it, I think, sticky between friends. At the end of the day, we're a communication platform, and people come to our platform to talk to their best friends and family. The more fun that we make it and the more connected that we make it, the longer they're going to stick around, whether it be content or lenses or filters.
Absolutely. Lyndsay, before I come over to you, Anmol, one quick follow-up question. Do you ever see that what's happening on one social media platform, like if Twitter is sort of blowing up about sports, that impacts how people want to engage? Like, are they coming to Snap for a reprieve? Like, do you actually see what happens on one in terms of sports engagement impact how people do or do not engage with that type of content on Snap?
Yeah, great question. We've done a couple studies on this, and I think what we generally see is when there's a big play, there's a big moment in sports, right? Most people on Snap want to share their reaction with their friends. So they're taking some sort of selfie, throwing on a lens, and sending it to a group of friends, to individuals, posting their stories. We see a lot of that in the moment on Snap. I think probably on Twitter, you see that reaction via a tweet, right? In the same way. But for us, it's kind of like you want to showcase, especially, by the way, during this time period we haven't talked about yet, during these last 12, 13 months, when you can't be at a bar or at a game with your friends physically, you want to share that moment, your experience with them kind of on Snap emotionally. So I think that's the thing we see on our platform. But it's different. It's different everywhere else. I think if you ask Twitter, if you ask TikTok, if you ask Facebook, their consumption and engagement trends definitely differ, which is why you see different audiences on Snapchat versus other platforms.
Thank you for that. I was actually just curious as you were talking.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that.
No
Lyndsay, all right, over to you. How is NBC Universal making decisions differently? I know you talked about redefining success. What trends, what sort of things are you seeing from your company, but also other media companies as they are adapting to this generation?
Yeah, I think it's sort of threefold. I think the first, just from a pure marketing standpoint, customization is critical, right? To Anmol's point, we cannot take, and this has definitely been for years now, you can't take one beautiful, linear promo and just distribute it, right? Like there's just specs issues and time limitations. There's just, for a while, probably the last, I won't say decade, but probably the last 5 or 6 years, that's critically important. You can't you have so many options just in pick any social media feed. You can scroll by so much cool stuff and you don't stop anyway. So I think customization to ensure that what we're putting in front of Gen Z is resonating. And that could be a completely different piece of creative, a completely different talent involved, a completely different look, but the message is the same, what we want you to do. And whether it's watch on TV or to stream it or just to watch the ad before the content, that's really important. I think too, targeting is also really important to us from the marketing side. So we want to make sure, and we have a ton of tools to be able to do this, that if we are putting specific content in front of people, it's actually going to who we want it to go to. So that's been super helpful. Snap has a lot of great tools. A lot of the social networks do. YouTube, that's like the best part about, there's always positives and negatives of the sort of the digital ecosystem, but that really does help us ensure that we get content in front of everybody. And then I think what you're seeing across the sports media landscape is also through the content itself. So there are plenty of places that any generation can watch their stuff, whether it's streaming or television or on social platforms, even, at bars. But I think the talent that you see on screen, whether it's through diversity or age, what they're talking about is changing, right? I was on an airplane before COVID and I was sitting next to a young person, and I'm pretty sure I had like NBC Sports swag on because it's about 90% of my wardrobe. And we were talking about, I'm not going to name names, we were talking about an on-air talent who is a legend. And she said to me, she was like, wow, he's as old as my grandpa. And I was like, oh my gosh, what? He's like the best in the business. But she could not in any way relate to this talent, while a huge subsection of viewers absolutely do. They grew up with this person. They are the best. Even like John Madden, so many folks have no idea that John Madden was a Hall of Fame NFL coach. Rather, he's this game on EA Sports. So I think you're starting to see just a complete evolution with talent, with actors, with hosts, with the kind of composition of the content. It's not just putting a young person doing the exact same thing in play-by-play. It's actually starting to sort of infiltrate the content itself so that it is appealing. Gen Z athletes, many of them are Gen Z. There are so many things that are relatable to these athletes. The older ones are millennials. So it's like, there's a lot that is just there as such an awesome base, but it has to be positioned the right way. So I'm seeing that generally across the just the media ecosystem, is that, we're seeing a lot younger talent. They have different points of view. And I think it's bringing in kind of a different energy. And that's not just sports. I think that's pretty much across everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a whole other piece to think about too, is the intergenerational. While you're trying to appeal to one generation, are you losing other generations who are like, what is that? That's too busy. That's too much. And how do you sort of merge all of this? And then you have like millennials versus boomers that, there's a lot to unpack there. So I want to come before we have about 10 minutes left. And I think the purpose-driven sort of Gen Z as activists, as very values and purpose-driven generation as a whole. Alana and Carlyle, I want to start with you. Sort of, how do you see that, as people who engage in sports, in your communities, with your peers, with other young people? How are you seeing that alignment of values driven, of activism? Social justice in sports is very controversial. So Anmol and Lyndsay, I want to talk to you guys about this too, from kind of the decision making side. But for the two of you younger, what is it that you're looking for? What do you feel like your generation wants to see when it comes to the activism, the social justice, and how it aligns with sports? Alana?
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of always crack a joke that I pick my favorite athletes based on like who they are off the field and like what like their morals are and like what they do. And I think that's what a lot of people now, and like that Gen Z, like that's what it's all about. Kind of what we were saying, how Gen Z is following an athlete versus following like a team. I think it's very similar to how they view like what their opinions are, what they're speaking out on. And like you said, it's very controversial, but like if you speak out on it and it's something that you agree with, there's a good chance you will build affinity with that athlete or maybe with that team that took a whole stance, as an organization. So I think that's something very personal for like Gen Z. Like I was saying, I think when I look at F1, which is something that everyone I think has really gotten into in the last year, with Drive to Survive and on Netflix, like what we were saying, that long-term content. I look at Lewis Hamilton and I think it's incredible the things that he does. Like, I think he's a great athlete. I think he's great at what he does in F1. And I think what he does off the track is incredible too. So, just things like that. I think it's important. I think, we've had panels and we've had discussions at Latinx and Sports, and it's like why sports and politics are together and like why you can't separate them. It's because you are, an athlete on the field, but you are also a human being off the field. And, it's how you use your platform and your social media following to do better and to change kind of that landscape and talk about those important issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember a time when that wasn't encouraged, when teams didn't want to see individual players speak out on social issues and things like that. Carlyle, what are your thoughts on this? What are you looking for? What do you feel like you see across your generation in terms of the values-driven piece and beyond? Alana, I think everything you just said fits in perfectly with sort of this shift of this younger generation to individuals and individual stories and individual actions and who is this person? Is there also something you're expecting to see from leagues, from teams, when it comes to social justice and activism?
Definitely. Alana, you took the words right out of my mouth. Like, really, like them using their platforms, I think is something we all look for because they have this chance. Not everyone has a platform to speak out on issues like this, but beyond the individual level, I think about we were talking about like purpose-driven athletes. My first thought went to the WNBA Dream and their campaigns in Atlanta. The MLB moving the All-Star game out of Atlanta. Those are big statements, and there's a lot of power in these leagues that people don't always realize, and that can create a strong ripple effect and lasting effect in these areas, and really like get people to like wake up and listen and realize that there are some serious issues out there. So for me, like I love seeing this side of sports and this side of teams and leagues, and we're even seeing it from the content creation and the almost agency side. We look at Endeavor, which is the umbrella company for WME IMG. They just recently launched their own impact branch, all about social impact within entertainment, fashion, sports, which is huge because we need to diversify these areas, whether it's on camera, behind the camera. All of these areas need change. And so I think seeing so many of these leagues, these broadcast companies, networks, adding this element and realizing that they have power and they have a duty to do that is really encouraging for our generation.
Yeah, absolutely. I love to see it. I think it's amazing and really important. You guys also have created this ability to hold companies, people, all of that accountable, which is also really important and a powerful tool that you're exercising at such a young age, which I think is really awesome. Anmol, how about from your perspective, just in the platform, the communication and camera app that Snap is and how people are engaging, what do you see as like for this generation in particular, what are they looking for? How do you kind of marry their activism and sports, the sports content piece?
Yeah, I think Lyndsay and Carlyle mentioned this earlier, but I think what's really unique, right? You have these two things happening at the same time. You have obviously this movement from this generation, as Carlyle mentioned, social followings and social media exist today. It didn't exist during the Michael Jordan era. So the ability to spread a message quickly to millions of people. This is really the first time ever that athletes have been able to do this, which is why it's so important. And then to the point Lyndsay mentioned earlier too, like we see this all the time on Snap, the younger athletes, and we use the NBA and WNBA as a great example. We're seeing this happen now with them more than anybody else, right? They were born during this generation. They might be in high school or going to college and have more Twitter and Instagram followers than half the league. And they have this ability to use that platform, to use Carlyle's statement there, to really make change. So I think what we're seeing is it's our generation on Snapchat is that 13 to 24-year-old. And it's really, really cool for us because you see people who grew up with our platform that using it the last 5 or 6 years. And now they're so in tune with what's going on in the world that I don't think we saw this before. Like I remember following teams when I was younger, like that never really happened. And obviously this time period has been such an important time for it to happen. So it's really fun for us to see athletes that we work with that are 18, 19, 20 years old that know more than we do, right? And know how to use our platforms better than we do. And that's awesome, right? They have figured this out, and now we're helping them kind of amplify and share their message to so many people. And I think, to the second part of your question around why it's important, I'll use COVID as an example last year. Maybe the people on Snapchat weren't going to be the most affected, but they still need to understand the importance of mask wearing, social distancing, washing hands. We did a bunch of athlete PSAs across Snapchat to kind of share that message. And to Lyndsay, what she said earlier about you got to reach these people where they are. There are millions of young people on Snapchat every single day talking to their best friends, watching content, and having a message from an athlete that they know and recognize talking about this is a game changer. So we've tried to use our platform as a way to kind of help and be hopefully a conduit to all these important issues.
That's awesome. I love that. Lyndsay, for you, from sort of this big media network, NBC Universal, how have you guys walked the walk and the talk, especially over, between the pandemic and the racial justice movement and, all of the things that this generation is so passionate about, and then the ways that your fellow panelists have just talked about, how that spills over into sports. How do you take all of this into account? Sort of where is the positioning of that activism as a corporation and a company that has stakeholders and all of those things? How do you marry all of that?
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough balance for sure. I think there's a reason why stick to sports is a thing. And of course, you still see that all over Twitter. When anyone says anything that's related to sports and politics, but I think it's definitely been a journey. Protesting has been around forever. It's kind of crazy to think Colin Kaepernick first took a knee almost 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years this football season. And I do think there has been a shift, especially I can really just speak from kind of the sports media side, but we have an entire news organization that really covers the news, and we are here to cover the sports. The reality is that is all merged, and it has been for several years, but I do think it was a tricky balance. I think our company has invested a ton of money into racial injustice, both internally and externally, through various different funds. But I think it's important now that we're telling the full story. The delicate balance is we are the broadcast network, so we technically don't really have opinions, but we have talent that we can speak on behalf, or we can speak to the athletes and let them tell their stories. It's critically important, I think, now also, is that we're not avoiding these stories, because that was sort of the easier thing to do, where it's like, let's just not touch it. and news can cover it because it's not really sports, but it kind of is. I think we are as a world in covering sports, we're just past it. There are certainly plenty of people who we hear from that don't want to see a single thing but what's on the field. But the reality is we're here, our job is to tell the full story. So I think there's a lot of growth that's happened. I think the leagues, the teams, most of the teams and leagues have all really embraced. I mean, this matters to players. As you know, as a company, a lot of this stuff was infecting our employees, and you can't just turn a blind eye when it is now it's not just being left at the door. So I think there's a lot of growth that's happened. There's always room to do more. But I think it's for us, it's telling that full story and making sure that we're not avoiding tough conversations, because we have plenty of people on our staff that can speak to these things and tell those stories the right ways. And where we can't, we can speak to the athletes or coaches directly. And so I think that there has been a seismic shift in the last couple of years. But I think we're definitely going to evolve as we go. The sort of racism layer is one piece, but the pandemic, that's a different angle. There's a lot of things that we just now are completely infiltrated into sports. And it's just kind of how we balance and tell the full story.
Amazing. And we are at time, but just really, really quickly, and just yes or no from Alana and Carlyle. Do you guys feel that what Anmol and Lyndsay just talked about in terms of the seismic shift and the ways that these platforms, social media and content platforms and large media platforms are integrating all of, these two worlds that used to be separate together? Alana, do you feel that? Are you seeing that shift?
Yeah, no, I definitely think I see that shift. And I think, what we were saying, like, it was definitely a time where we needed to have those conversations. And that's where Latinx and Sports, came about. We were all sitting at home in the middle of the pandemic, and it was like, hey, there's not an organization like this. Like, I want to take the initiative and do it. And I think, a lot of teams and leagues are now kind of listening, and they're like, okay, like, this is something we should have done a long time ago. And maybe we're kind of late to the game, but like, we're going to start doing it now because it's important and it's something that needs to be done.
Awesome. Thank you. Carlyle, how about you? Is this something you've seen that you feel like you're experiencing?
I've definitely seen it in some places more than others. I mean, you brought back the Colin Kaepernick thing. Like, that's still an ongoing thing where he's never really gotten an official apology from the NFL, from the commissioner. But then you see Adam Silver, I believe is his name, for the NBA. Like, they have really pushed hard in making sure that their players' voices are heard. So I think it depends on which lens you're looking at and which place you're looking at. But in some places, yes, in some places, no.
Absolutely. That's fair. Well, thank you all. I know we are at time. I have absolutely loved this conversation, and I've learned a ton, to be honest. So thank you very much for just lending your different perspectives and experiences and expertise to this dialogue. We very much appreciate it. And thank you for all of you out there tuning in. This is an exciting week, as all weeks seem to be in sports now that people can actually play again. So thank you. Thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.